Hi, welcome to Mental Health Monday. I'm Heidi Gaiman from HeidiGaiman.com, and today, in fact, this entire blog year, if you will, August all the way through April, we're going to have special guest, Dr. Kim Markshausen with us for Mental Health Monday, and we're really excited. Kim and I both share some similar passions, both theology and connecting psych and sociology and the way we interact and relationship and our environments and all of that together. But she has areas of expertise that I don't, and so we're going to learn a lot from Kim, and I'm looking forward to our journey together as we talk about, I think, a lot of different theories that come forward when we talk about development. And this month in particular, we're going to talk about trust, attachment, and growth. So for anybody who has been following the blog over at Heidi Gaiman, I can't say my own name, HeidiGaiman.com, you can find some other articles, resources, podcasts, things like that to complement what we talk about here. But we're going to start off by really laying that foundation of, Kim, can you help us understand what is attachment? Why are we concerned about that?
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. I agree with you, Heidi. I love that connection between psychology and theology because it just gives us new insights. So attachment from a developmental perspective is something that typically happens to us when we're very young. Sometime in the first 2 years, we develop a pattern of relationship with primary caregivers. And how that relationship develops then impacts how we grow as individuals, how our personality develops, and how we have relationships with other people.
Yeah, I think that word pattern really sticks out to me there. So when we talk about attachment, we're not talking about a single incident, although those can have an impact on us. Attachment really impacts our system, mind, body, and spirit, because it is a pattern that we're talking about with our early caregivers.
It's not like imprinting when a goose hatches and sees a human and thinks they're a human. It's not like that at all. So
I love that. That's a super fun way that God works in, the created world and everything. With humans, I think it's so fascinating, and we want to connect this for our listener to some of the theology and then dive into that, how we see that kind of in our relationships today, how we probably saw it in some of our early relationships, how we differ in our uniqueness as humans. We're going to kind of cover just so as you're listening or watching everyone on Facebook or on the YouTube channel, just kind of consider your own experiences as we talk about this. And if you have questions, feel free to throw them up. If we don't get to them in this particular broadcast, we'll try to send a message to you. This is not therapy, even though I'm a therapist. So just kind of keeping in mind that we're a little limited on what we can offer, but we do want to help you have the resources that you need. So feel free to send some questions or message us. When we talk about attachment, I think especially of Bowlby, B-O-W-L-B-Y, right? Is Bowlby is, kind of the original guy in the 50s and 60s who created this concept of, written concept of attachment. God's the creator of the actual concept, right? And so his original definition was really lasting. I love the language of this, psychological connectedness between human beings. And so I think that is a part of how God created us. I definitely think he was just bringing forward in science and research what God has created in our systems. And so that connectedness is really essential for us as human beings, I think, to feel happy, to be healthy, to understand the foundation that we are loved and valued, which I talk about in the article over at HeidiGaiman.com. So, Kim, I know that you've talked about this a little bit with the Trinity. Can you tell us more about that kind of theological foundation of the Trinity and attachment?
Yeah, I think that's an important connection, because when you develop a secure attachment, which is our goal, if we could develop a perfect secure attachment, we wouldn't have any other needs. But most of us develop a slightly less than perfect secure attachment. So it doesn't mean that there's something horribly wrong with us. But we're left still with some needs. And if people have listened to the podcast that you did with Dr. Hanneman, I really enjoyed that. He talked about those basic needs of safety and lovability and worthiness. And so your understanding of those three things grows out of your relationship with those primary caregivers, which is typically parents. So, but the answer then to that is, what if I don't feel safe? What if I don't feel lovable? What if I don't feel worthy? Those become the things that lead us to a good therapist, such as yourself, aren't they?
Thanks, Kim. Right? Yeah.
But always the primary answer to that question is our faith. So am I safe? Well, yes, I am a child of the Heavenly Father. I am the child of a God who can keep me absolutely safe, not only in this world, but in the next. And am I lovable? Yes, not because of me or because of my relationship with a parent, but because Jesus died and rose again for me. I am forgiven, and because of that, I can forgive others when our relationships are weak. And am I worthy? It's not really a question about me. I become worthy because I'm sanctified by the Spirit. I've been set apart, and the Spirit works in me. So that becomes what we can hold on to in terms of our faith when we're struggling with these kind of issues.
Yeah, I think that really helps in understanding that God is Father, Son, and Spirit really gives us a fuller picture of that. I think it's really easy to see him as one person of the Trinity, and we all lean, I think, toward one aspect more than others. And then, in our own personal denomination, Kim and I are both Lutherans and LCMS Lutherans, I think we do lean so heavily onto the Savior, onto Jesus, the Son, which is appropriate, but also sometimes being aware that we can miss those other aspects that can give us a different sense of safety, a different sense of worthiness, a different sense of trust and security, I think is really important. And so, like the issue of worthiness, I see this a lot. We are worthy as creation. Like, God wouldn't have created us if he didn't define that as something valuable.
Right.
But that leaves us a part of relationship with him still because of our sinfulness, because of just sin in the world and this big mess that we live in and everything. And so there's a different kind of worthiness when I know that forgiveness is mine. I know I don't have to live in that shame and guilt through the Son. And then the Spirit, like you said, the fact that God sends himself into me to live inside of me, to continuously spend day by day with me, that's a different sense of worthiness that I am attached to him. He'll never let me go, even when I don't feel that sense even. So
it's very freeing for me to be able to think of God first when I think of my self-understanding, instead of putting that burden on me. And it's freeing to me as a parent, too, as I think about my relationship with my children, that God created us to be clay, not granite. So as I, have a parent, make mistakes, God is there to jump in and to fill in that space and help.
I think you're right. And so often, as we frame this whole conversation about what attachment looked like for us, or what it looks like as we go forward as parents or caregivers, and we know from research too that children do need other adults in their life, other impactful adults in their life. And so as we want to do that for the people around us, even maybe our nieces and nephews, or for special youth that we come together with for our faith communities, or maybe students that we teach, different aspects like that, understanding too that our parents and those primary caregivers are going to be there, especially when kids are little. They're real source of attachment, and we are like complements, if you will. I think being able to move forward in that, with that wrapped in grace, understanding that God, he's the great attacher, if you will.
Yes.
And the Spirit is the voice of attachment, so that burden isn't on me. I really like that reminder. That's good. So, Kim, tell us a little bit more. I think understanding that there is some uniqueness to our attachment experiences, as well as the way we create attachment for our kids. Can you tell us a little bit about how we're unique in that?
Well, it would be great if attachment was just something that worked the same way for everyone.
Yeah, I want a system, please, for parenting and teaching and faith and everything.
The 5 rules to remember for attachment.
Yeah, that's not a thing.
The problem with research on human beings is that we have so many variables and so many things that impact that. And one of the things that can have an impact on attachment are character traits that we are born with. So that character traits are a little bit different than our personality. So as you know, your personality is that combination of your character traits and things that happen to you in your world. But character traits, we're pretty sure they're from the get-go. They're part of what God gave us. But our character traits will cause us to react to things in different ways. So your first child in the family, for instance, may be a little bit more adaptable. And maybe that second child is much more about rhythmicity. Everything needs to happen at a certain
schedules.
Time. Yes, schedules. So that adaptable child then reaches out to you, cries, letting you know they're hungry or they're wet, but they can adapt to you not being able to drop everything and come and help them right away. I mean, because this is the way the world works, isn't it? Whereas a child who is more intense or is more about rhythm, they'll see that as, I don't know for sure if I can count on someone to come and help me. So that can impact the way they become secure or how secure they are in their attachment.
That's really fascinating. I really appreciate that. Even so, I have 4 kids, and when they were born, I think one of the most shocking things for me as each of them were born was how different they were in their needs. Everyone needs to eat and sleep and all of that stuff, but the way they responded to me and the way then I inverse responded to them with love and frustration and all the whole big ball of wax together is pretty shocking, I think, for a parent. So that's really helpful to understand.
Yeah, I remember being with a friend who had a baby on her hip, and the baby starts crying a little bit, and she switches him to the other hip and stuff, and the crying gets more and more intense. You know how that is when they're... And I remember thinking, I've never heard that from my child, because from mine it was that intense, gotta be fed right now from the very beginning. But our children train us and help us to know what their needs are, and in fact, psychologists call it goodness of fit parenting. That sounds intense, Kim. Help us. It is, and it sounds like it puts all
a little judgmental.
But it's probably not the best kind of name, but basically what it says is, when I have that child that's really intense, I learn to respond more quickly because that's what that child needs. And a different child is going to have needs in a different area. And so as a parent, interact with my children and, my spouse and other people, and I see them, I develop a parenting style that fits that child a little bit better. Okay, so it's about the good fit between the two people, not me as a parent or a teacher or anything. Oh, I love that. That's good. So one thing I hear you saying, Kim, is that one of the best things we can do as parents is to be curious about our children, and as educators then too, or as people just in relationship with other people, maybe with my spouse, other people, because there is that attachment that Justin talked about in our romantic relationships as adults and things like that too. So being curious about how they best, and we're not talking love languages here, although I'm sure that's kind of caught up in it stuff too. We're just talking about their basic needs and way they voice those to us, or non-verbally share those with us, and then how they receive them best as well. That's called attunement, right? Those two things are connected, very attachment and then attunement, being in tune with one another. So that's good. So being curious is one tip I think we can give you today. And we'll have some questions on the blog tomorrow that'll help you get curious about your own experiences, and then being who you are for the people in your life today. So one more thought I wanted to say too that came to mind, Kim, is that
trauma, I'm a trauma therapist, so my lens is constantly like, there's always things that are out of our control in life then that are also going to impact those moments of attachment, if you will. I picture the baby with the friend with a baby on her hip. If at that moment someone came in and told us something really devastating about life, or if we're trying to take care of our child and we've just lost a parent of our own,
Right.
or something like that, or we're struggling with rent or whatever, then those kinds of things that are out of our control can impact the attachment. And so I just want people to know that there's a lot of grace wrapped around that God gives attachment a wide cushion, I think, a lot of times. And so we're really looking at the wide overall lens of our parenting experiences, not just like the moment you messed up and yelled at your child when you were at your wit's end, and just knowing that he also can heal that as we talk about these things, that we are, doing many things very well probably, and doing some things that maybe we could improve upon. So, yeah.
Yeah. The way God created us, most of us are like dandelions, and we will grow wherever our seeds happen to hit. Mm-hmm. And that's a wonderful gift from God. And so, I mean, you mentioned about losing a loved one at about the time when a child is born. There's specific attachment research done mm-hmm. in that area. It is hard. Because grieving impacts your life, but it doesn't mean that you're going to ruin your relationship with your child. Mm-hmm. And the relationship you have with that child is going to be different because of it, but there's going to be good things too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we don't, we don't want to overdo the idea of resilience, but I think resilience is something that you and I both feel really passionately about, that's another gift that comes out when we wrestle in relationship together, when we have worked through things that were really good, but also really hard and all of that, then we get to a place where we've built this thing called resilience together that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So, yeah, that's really awesome.
But a child in our family who had epilepsy was diagnosed with that very young age, and there was a lot of stress in his life because of all the blood draws and all the hospital visits. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what came out of that was the strongest sense of empathy that mm-hmm. I've seen, in any, when I saw him in my kindergarten class with other children, and I could see his sense of empathy was so mm-hmm. strong. So
that's
we
really
know
beautiful.
God brings good out of it.
And he does, yeah. And I think we can honor both the struggle as well as see that joy and the things that come from it. We don't want to do one or the other. We want a both and situation with those things, and especially with attachment. So can you tell us some things, Kim, that improve attachment bonds?
Well, that would be anytime you're improving your relationship with a child. So if we look at, for instance, the situation I just mentioned about my son with epilepsy, there's some secure attachment issues there because I, as a parent, had to give him medicine that tasted really, really bad. And I had to take him to the doctor again and again. In fact, my husband and I told him, I think I'll just be in charge of this so that he knows there's one parent that's not going to be eating him to slaughter.
Safer parent, yeah.
But I also knew that I could balance that out by making sure that we had other times where it was just he and I communicating, doing something that he loved, or there was reassurance. And that in that situation, I knew exactly what he was dealing with, so it was easier for me to come up with activities that would balance it out.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if some of the Gottman research might kind of correlate, if you will, here with the turning toward instead of turning away. So we know that when we turn toward, we need about 8 turning towards in order to make up for the 1 turning away, right? And so I like your that suggestion, that tip, to just look for the opportunity to build some safety, especially when there's been some disruption to that. Again, a lot of stuff we can control, and then there's other things we can't control. But both of those things need to be responded to. And so that's really awesome. Yeah, that's really helpful.
You have an opportunity to tell a child, if not in words, but maybe in actions, that I can't make the world perfect for you. That's
Ooh.
part of what attachment is. I want to feel safe. I want to feel lovable. I want to feel worthy. And the parent's response, I can't do that, but I can do the best that I can with it. And God is helping me too.
Yeah, those opportunities to build that spiritual awareness, but also psychological awareness that like the world is broken. And being honest about that with our kid, I think is really powerful when we can do that in education. If you work in a parochial school or if you're in a faith-based setting, so often taking those experiences to honor with that youth or that child. The world is pretty hard, and sharing without like developmentally appropriate sharing with them. I've struggled with this before, or this was my experience that made me feel really unsafe, but this is how God tended to me in that. Those I think really help, whether core or on the press, what do you call that? The margin or whatever.
The periphery.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Of attachment. Those messages really build, I think, strong attachment, whether you're the central attachment figure or someone supporting that for someone else.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important for parents and teachers, I like how you've brought in the classroom here, to remember that we don't have to diagnose. We don't have to be the therapist like you are and say, oh, well, this is an attachment issue and here's what's missing.
Right.
What I typically tell parents and teachers is if you get a response from your child that feels out of place, like if they are more upset about something that you think that they ought to be, it's taking you aback, that is probably a signal that there's a need there that needs to be met. So there's a perfect time to be that imperfect parent or that imperfect teacher and say, let's talk about this. Let me help you with this. I may not understand what you're saying to me, but it's real.
Yeah.
And we can do something about it.
Definitely. And I think you mentioned some things in our notes, I think, or did I write these in? But about 3 things: proximity, comfort, and attentiveness. Right. And those 3 elements, being aware of those 3 elements. So where can we offer proximity? So moving closer to a child. These things sound so simple, right? But I will say, especially as an exhausted young mom with multiple children who need multiple things at all times, it's okay for it to feel hard. It's okay to be like, I don't really want to touch anyone right now. Can everyone stop touching me? And I want to use the bathroom, Again, holding the hard with the good. But finding that proximity, I think, is really good. And I've seen like our public educators who have maybe some limits on touch and things like that, be able to find creative ways in order to increase proximity. And, just that we all felt in COVID with the isolation and all the Zoom meetings and stuff, that without proximity, we can feel a little bit untethered. We feel less connected. And so I think that proximity is a really good one. Do you want to speak about comfort or attentiveness to us at all?
Well, they're all important, but as you mentioned that, I was thinking about it in terms of development over a lifespan, and realizing too that the kind of proximity and comfort and attentiveness an infant needs is very different than someone who's in middle school or high school. As children are learning and growing and moving a little bit away from their primary caregiver and solving their own needs, it's, I think, really important that we think about, let's look at middle school. How do we handle that in middle school? We're not changing diapers. We certainly hope not, for most of us anyway. And sitting on the lap or that kind of hugging may be off limits for a while. Right. I learned that with my former kindergarten students. Once they get back into high school, I can hug them again. But that being available. So you do your proximity, maybe even in a text, by checking
that's
with them.
Such good
or
tips,
that attentiveness or that comfort is just in something that you say where you don't expect a response, but you're kind of letting them know, I can see today's a tough day.
Right.
But it's still there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And God says that even though our observation is that attachment really develops by the time you're age 2, God says we still have room to make a difference, to help that.
I agree that's one reason the theme for this year is always growing, because God's definition of development, I think, is not as linear as a social psychologist would define it as. I really think so much of God's stuff is more of a circle,
Yeah,
or even a circle with some scribbles and back and forth. But he's always coming back around and offering us more opportunities. And so we see almost like a slinky is the way I defined it in a different podcast. There's a slinky of attachment, if you will, and a slinky of how we come back around to autonomy or independence or other places in the kind of attachment, development spectrum. So, that also brings to mind for me the idea of neurodiversity. I know you and I both, again, feel pretty strongly about encapsulating for people the ability to allow some neurodiverse relationships in our life and love them and appreciate them and see how we all are neurally diverse. So I think part of that is that attunement then. My child who is not typical, if you will, is going to accept proximity and comfort and attentiveness differently than my child who is neurotypical. And so knowing kind of what they need and everything is good. Yeah, Lisa, one of our listeners, says friends. Lisa's a therapist herself, so she has some wisdom to share too. But God gives us these other kind of relationships. And I like how Justin said there's attachment relationships and then there's everything else. There'll be some questions again on the blog tomorrow to help you define who are the attachment relationships in my life right now that God is using to heal maybe some of the wounds from before, or also allowing me to be in their space, to be in proximities, offer comfort, give attentiveness and all of that. That we don't have to do that for everybody. I think that's important.
Yeah. I like how you mentioned about neurodiversity because, I spoke a little bit earlier about how most of us are dandelions. Mm-hmm. But that's part of a theory, too, the dandelion orchid theory. Oh. That tells us that in fact, research on attachment of children who came from orphanages in Romania, I was surprised to find that 70% of those children developed a healthy attachment.
Wow.
In those horrible situations.
And that's quite a bit different than maybe we've heard some of the research, I think, before, right, now that we've followed it through. Yeah.
Sure. And we focus on the ones who didn't. Yeah. But the dandelion orchid theory is about differential susceptibility, which says that there are some children who have, it could be character traits or attributes that they just need more of a hothouse environment in order to grow. Okay. But they also come along with extreme gifts. So some of those traits like intensity and persistence would make them really good at something later on, but make them really a handful when they're younger. And when they can get the kind of attunement that you're talking about, that goodness of fit parenting too, they can flourish just like our other children too.
Oh, right. Exactly. I remember meeting with Dr. Richard Solomon once, who's one of the, autism spectrum experts and developed an entire play theory, if you will, for treatment. And he talks about, where would we get our engineers and where would we get our creatives if we didn't have some neurodiversity? And so speaking of neurodiversity and flexibility of thinking, Kim, can you talk to us a little bit about how flexible is attachment for children in particular, but then also as we form adult relationships? I think you used the word plasticity, which I really appreciate. How is our attachment involves plasticity? I can't say these words.
Yeah, don't ask me to say it. I can write it, but I probably would mess it up too. Well, it's that combination of knowing that the bulk of security happens by age 2, but we're malleable. We can grow. So it doesn't mean that if a child hasn't developed a really strong, secure attachment by age 2, that means that child's ruined. For most of us, there's a few children, and who can be diagnosed with a severe attachment disorder, which is different than what we're talking about here. I won't try to explain that. That's your bailiwick there. But that malleable, the plasticity, if you will, is what happens through the rest of their lifetime. So if I'm a child, if for instance I'm born but my mother is severely depressed for some reason, like there might be postpartum depression, I might not have a good secure attachment. But if I have certain character traits that allow me to connect to other people. Or if my mother gets help and then she's able to reconnect with me, or if I bond better with my father, all of those are aspects that help to ameliorate that initial difficulty.
Okay, that helps a lot. Well, and I think about that's one reason. I know it's a little scary, I've noticed as a therapist, for people to reflect so intensely on their early childhood experiences. I think sometimes our systems feel a little bit like they're drifting back there. You know, the system is not quite aware that we're in the present sometimes when we do that, and so there's some like technological difficulties inside our brains and our spinal cords, if you will, with that.
Yeah.
So therapists have different grounding techniques and stuff. They can help you to do that if that's really uncomfortable for you to kind of dive into that realm of early attachment. But I do think one thing you're saying is maybe start with your attachments you have now, because that's where, and of course, with Jesus Christ, with the security of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, holding on to us and never letting go, always being attached to us, that can be a place then where we can grow out from. So returning to the Word, returning to awareness that God is attached to us, that there are people in our life. Maybe that's our romantic partner, our spouse. Maybe that is a very, very close friend who has shown themselves, really trustworthy and holding our struggles with us. Or maybe that's a sibling. I know I have one sibling in particular that I turn to a lot with struggle stuff because she was a really early attachment figure for me. And so, looking at those relationships we have at present and what God offers us now, then we can kind of float back and consider maybe what those early attachments look like and how God brought us from here to there. So,
well, I like that you're talking about the questions that you're going to pose, because I think that's a great exercise, is to take a look at what you remember and look at your life. And I know one of my weakest areas would be in terms of lovability. But if I look at my character traits, I would have been that child who would not necessarily smile and laugh at everyone, that little baby. I would have been the one that would have been, okay, I've had enough faces today.
I like that you know that.
Pull away. And my sister, on the other hand, extremely gregarious. And so my growing up years, I started to feel that I'm not as lovable because I cannot react to people like my sister. Well, that's good for me to understand, because now when I react to someone that I feel has maybe not been loyal to me, or I thought the relationship was different, I can say, okay, that's going back to when I was 3. It's all right. And then turn to my faith and remember that I am lovable, and now come back to that problem and see it in a different light.
That's really good. And so it does help us, we're talking about there's a lot of unconscious stuff happening with attachments. Moving it more to the consciousness is, I think also a way that God brings his light in. So taking away so much of the darkness of like not knowing what happened to us from 0 to 2, just kind of evaluating where God has brought us. I think in Scripture, so often we see him say to the Israelites and to different people, like, remember when I did this. So if we don't ever go back to reflect, then we don't have that gift of remembering God's faithfulness and where he brought us. And so I think that also then we'll have a stronger sense of that attachment that he does give to us, that he bonds with us through Christ Jesus. So,
attachment is a complicated thing because it happens when we're infants and toddlers, so there's a huge responsibility on the part of the parent. But then as I grow older, it's not helpful for me to say, well, it didn't work for me when I was 2.
Right.
I have to say, where am I at now? So now it becomes my issue. And then, of course, that's not helpful unless I'm also reaching out to my God. And say, what's your plan for this?
Right. Yeah. He doesn't want there to be that sense of shame attached to those questions of, am I worthy? Am I lovable? That's, why he gives us Jesus. So interestingly enough, next month we'll be talking about autonomy and shame. And so this segues really well, because I do think what you're saying is when we look at these early things, then those other things start to come up for us, whether we did feel capable at a time when we were growing in our preschool and early elementary years? Did we feel like we belonged in our middle school, high school years? You know, do we have a sense of identity forming and self-differentiation, which we'll talk about. So we will definitely tackle more of this. This is why we're working through development, because there's these foundational things, and it's going to grow and then come back around, like we said. So thanks, Kim. We really appreciate just so much that you shared. I think we have some good tips to walk away with. I'd love to hear from the listeners. Throw up a couple of your favorite insights that you gained in the comments here or on YouTube. And then if you have any other questions or anything after this, like, feel free to message me and I can get a hold of Kim too. Please visit Kim at her website. Kim, do you want to like spell it for us? I can also put a link in the notes as well.
It's kim.marxhausen, marxhausen.net. And, you know, if your watchers are listing questions, both Heidi and I love to write in our blogs, and we would love to address some of those questions there. Absolutely. But you would find my blog, Stepping Out in Faith, and my parenting blog, Faith Parents, too. So
awesome. Thank you for that, Kim. Yes, exactly. I love it. You know, we will continue to keep touching on this. If you are in need of some good therapy, I encourage you to turn to EMDRIA, EMDRIA.org, which is the EMDR website. And that's just a list of clinicians that you can find in your area that have a high level of training. And many EMDR theories are attachment focused. So that's going to be something that's in their wheelhouse. There's also play therapy that we know that is a really good resource for treating early attachment and disrupted attachment, especially if we can get to it early on when kids are still little. Play therapy allows them to do some work in processing that. And then there's also EFT, which is emotionally focused therapy that does a lot of work with attachment in romantic relationships that can heal earlier attachment, so that we're not dealing with that anxious avoidant and things that happen when we have disrupted attachment. So I encourage you to check out those different resources online. I'll put some links in the show notes for different therapeutic theories, as well as Kim's information too. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you next month for Shame and Autonomy. Bye, you guys.
Bye.